I've never ever since seen colors so brilliant like that. And I'm going up a hill, and I've been told I'm going to be meeting Jesus, Muhammad, and I have no idea why, and my senior pastor who had passed away about 8 years before. And just as I'm seeing the tops of their head, and I don't sense I'm dead, they had no consciousness of that. I was just on a farm. But then a voice said,
My guest today is Dr. Kathy Winings, who had an aneurysm, ironically, on the same day, in the same location, and even at the same time of the day of an aneurysm that killed her mother. And her mother actually came to her during her NDE. And this is such a fascinating story. So, Kathy, welcome. I am so excited to talk to you today.
well, I'm excited to be here as well, Lori.
Well, we were fortunate enough to be together a couple of weeks ago at the International Ions Association conference, which was located in Phoenix in my back door. You had to travel from New York, but we actually got to have a couple of conversations in person. So I'm even more excited because it's kind of fun to talk to somebody that I've actually already met. So I guess the first question I would have for you is, what was your life like before this near-death experience happened?
Well, I led a very simple life. I was a professor of religious education, social justice, and neuroscience, actually, at a graduate seminary, a small graduate seminary. And I was also the vice president for academic affairs at the time. And so I opened up two new campuses for the school, one in New York City and one in Maryland, within what's called the Beltway, the DC Beltway. And so was very active in that way. And I did a lot of trainings of people to do religious education. So I lived what I thought was practicing what I preached in a sense, you know. And I thought I knew all these things. I've never met anyone with a near death experience, but I assumed I knew everything about the love of God.
Okay. And so your mother was taken by an aneurysm. So you want to talk about that just a little bit because it really plays into a big part of your NDE.
It does in many ways. It's the prelude to that. When my brain aneurysm ruptured, I did not have the same common experiences with a blinding headache, things like that. I just thought that I had water in my ears or that I'd gotten up too soon. So I sat back down and I'm sitting there going, maybe I should pop over to the ER, which was 7 minutes away. And uh, maybe it had to do with my heart aneurysm, which I did know I had, but I didn't know about the brain one. And as I'm sitting there thinking what to do, a woman's voice came and said, "No, you're not going to drive over there. For one, you promised you'd never do that again after your heart attack and you drove yourself to the ER, but you won't make it out your driveway." So she said, "Get off your butt and call the EMS immediately." I said, "Okay." Now, I had no idea whose voice it was at the time. And so I called. And I said to the man the first time, I said, "I live alone. I don't want to die alone." And then he said, "Well, before you pass out, please unlock your front door." And I was hearing these sirens then, because I know their bay where they wait in their offices is not far from my house either. And that was the last I remember for 7 weeks. I was in and out of consciousness. It was later, when I suspected it was my mother, that I went back into the records of her death, which was in 1985. And she was one of the normal statistics of 68% of the people with this kind of aneurysm do not survive beyond an hour. She was dead. She had a blinding headache one night. It was about 5 o'clock. Told my dad, "I'm going to go lay down." And the moment she sat on the bed, she was dead before her head hit the pillow. And it was both of our aneurysms were at the top of the aortic artery, and right under what's called the Circle of Willis. Circle of Willis is like the LA freeway in our brain of all of our blood supply. And our aortic artery feeds it, goes throughout our body. So it's right under that. So what I was experiencing actually in my ears was the blood that was coming, running throughout my brain. This is why most people die. Another 15% or so then who do survive have severe limitations and problems and physical challenges. And there's only about 12, 13% who survive with very little damage. I was in that category. So I think my mother was like guiding that, the experience. So I would do what was right. Even my neurosurgeon calls me his miracle in that sense, because it took hours to get me down to the major hospital.
So were you, it sounded like she told you to go, or he told you to go unlock the door. You didn't even have time to do that. So they had to break in?
No, I barely made it to the door.
You did make it.
I made it to the
Okay.
door because I had a small house then, and I was sitting on my piano bench and the door was right there. So I reached over, unlocked the door, and that was it. By the time they got to me, the first, I was undergoing the first stroke. I mean, a brain aneurysm is basically a stroke because it's what's called an hemorrhagic stroke, and it goes right under. It connects to the internal carotid. That's why it does that. And so, no, I made it in good time, but I was then in and out of consciousness. And apparently, the nurses told me in the ER and in the hospital ICU, I was pretty funny.
Really?
Yes, when I got to the ER, I was semi-conscious, and I said something like, the nurses said, "Oh, my husband just got off work in Long Island. He'll be here in about 2 hours." And the nurses are scratching their head because they know I was divorced. It's in my records. And they said, so they called my go-to person, right? My emergency contact, and asked her, has Kathy recently married? And my friend said, not unless she eloped in the last 5 days. Well, and then she got serious. What are you calling? Well, we need to know what her DNR orders are because we're not sure she will make it. Which flipped out. It scared my contact. She said, I can't do this. So she had her name taken off. She asked me later, please, I don't want to be that kind of person. It's too scary. So one of my former students, who is a chaplain, hospital chaplain, assumed that role. But yes, things like that. Or in the ICU, I said to the nurse, why do you have an American accent? And she looked at me and said, honey, where do you think you are? I said, well, in England, of course. Or I told my chaplain one time, have you seen the dishy doctors here? That's not my language at all. And she's never let me forget that one.
That's cute.
I was pretty funny.
It does sound like you're pretty funny. So you said, though, the last thing you remember is unlocking that door, and then you were gone and you were in and out of, I guess, consciousness, but not any that you remember from this human incarnation of Kathy for was it
7
days or
weeks. 7 weeks.
7 weeks. So what in the world happened to you during those 7 weeks outside of the human incarnation?
Well, my NDE itself, the actual catalyst event, was when I had, it was New Year's of 2021, and they thought I was stable enough to transfer to the hospital that was near my home because they have a wonderful residential PT program and rehab program and catering to this kind of experience. And it was in that ambulance when they were trying to transfer me. Poughkeepsie was where they had me originally, and that's about a 35-minute drive. Right about 5 minutes, they said, outside of the hospital being transferred to, my blood pressure zeroed out. I was gone. And then what I remember from that time was hearing, oh, please we're going to use the interfaith entrance to the ER. And I'm thinking, oh, that's nice. Interfaith. Oh, that's very polite. Oh, that's wonderful. Since I teach in a seminary, I thought that was good. And then next thing I knew, we were on a dairy farm. And I'm sitting there, where did Northern Duchess put the dairy farm? I don't remember a dairy farm behind the hospital. Wow, dairy farm. So that's where I visited, because coming from a family with both parents were farmers, that's what put me in a calming space, which is for many NDEs, that's hopefully what happens, so that you're calm through that process. And so I'm going through this beautiful dairy farm with a barn so red. I've never, ever seen red that brilliant. Gleaming silver equipment, but no cows and no people and no smell, of course, but brilliant colors. And I'm in the farm kitchen waiting for a snack. And I'm feeling the wood of the table going, wow, I've never seen wood like this. And asking, where's the restroom? And I'm hearing, oh, it's upstairs. Okay. And there's no elevator? No, there's no elevator. Well, that's interesting for rehab. Well, that's interesting. What if people can't go up the stairs? Are they stuck? These are going through my head. And then I take a walk outside. And it's a stunning blue sky, stunning green grass. I've never, ever since seen colors so brilliant like that. And I'm going up a hill, and I've been told I'm going to be meeting Jesus, Muhammad, and I have no idea why, and my senior pastor who had passed away about 8 years before. And just as I'm seeing the tops of their head, and I don't recognize, I don't, sense, well, if I'm meeting them, I'm dead. They had no consciousness of that. I was just on a farm. But then a voice said, no, it's not your time. You need to go back. You have more work to do in your life. And then after that, when I sort of had my first consciousness after that was back at the other hospital. So that was a catalyst for my NDE. And that's where I thought I was.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you were going up the hill and you knew that you were supposed to meet Jesus, Muhammad, and your former priest, how did you know that? Was it just a knowing,
Yeah,
or did
just
you
a
hear
knowing.
it?
No
Just a
one said
knowing.
anything to me. I just knew, oh, I get to meet Jesus and Muhammad and my pastor. Oh, wow. It, like I said, didn't dawn on me if I was meeting them where I was. I had never connected that's where I was. But out of the 7 weeks, those are the only images that have been seared into my brain, in a sense.
So did the farm that you were in and the barn and the scenery, did any of that have any familiarity other than you were comfortable with farms?
No, my grandparents, both grandparents were not. They did not have cows. They were not a dairy farm. They were straight prime southern Indiana. Crops of corn, soy, things like that. None of them had cows at all. So it was. I'm sitting there going, "This is interesting. Wow, dairy farm. Okay. Hmm.
So when you come out of this 7 weeks later and you've retained this memory, so what did that memory feel like as soon as you have that memory in your waking consciousness, you're back, you're Kathy, what are your first thoughts about it?
My first thoughts were I needed to unpack it. I needed to understand what it was all about. Because what stood out from that point on, when I got back to the other hospital and was in this unconscious, semi-conscious state, I had a series of conversations with Mother God. And that's really the depth of my NDE. The experience was lovely, the visuals, but for me, the lasting and enduring nature of my NDE were the series of conversations that that came out of that while I was still unconscious. And so
Okay,
when
so tell us a little bit about that.
well, the first memory of that I had when I woke up was Mother God telling me, you realize that it wasn't your doctrine and it wasn't your theology that saved you. It was my love that flows in your veins, like your blood flows in your veins. And I was even asked to put my hand on my arm to feel the flow of blood, even though I'm not conscious completely, but to feel the flow of love and realize this is as real love as ever. This is like love that flows in my, it's not a concept. Love was spoken of at that point. It wasn't some theological idea, but it was very real that I could touch in that sense. And that's what stayed, that was the first of a series of conversations like that that had progressed to the point where conversations progressed to, well, here's what I want you to do. This is how you're going to be transformed in your life. First of all, I want you to ask forgiveness from people who you may have hurt their hearts. And I knew what that meant. It was those that I may have said something to, or have been a little cross with my language, or said something I didn't even realize hurt their hearts in that sense. And I began to do that. Once I was up and around, a few months later, I began asking forgiveness from people. Of course, I was asked to forgive people as well. But the other major conversation in the series that began was, you will think differently now. You prided yourself on your cognitive intellectual abilities as a professor. All right. But this is not a cognitive thing. My love is not a cognitive thing or concept. It is real. And it fuels your heart, your motivation. It fuels your language, your actions, your behavior. And that is what you need to live out of first. And let that then guide your intellect and your intellectual responses. It's like a reversal of how I'd lived my life before as an academic. And it was different. The first article that I peer reviewed for a journal, I'm looking at it and going, I'm scratching my head going, I can't relate to this. It's like boom, flying right over my head because there was missing the meat and the heart of love in it. There's some intangible quality that wasn't fueling it. It was pure head. And I'm sitting there going, so I talked to the authors and I said, I'm sorry, this is what I'm getting. And the other peer reviewers said, yeah, oh, okay, that's true. Wow. Because their responses immediately in the review was very academic. And my comments to them were, I'm in awe of your brilliance. Thank you so much. I can't respond. And then that's how things shifted for me. And that was one of the biggest shifts and ongoing shifts for me.
So why do you think that the first thing that you were asked to do was around forgiveness? What, for the people that are watching and listening, what is it about forgiveness that you think that was the first thing that you were asked to do?
Forgiveness, as I taught in the seminary, is first of all about yourself. You forgive others because you don't want to carry that baggage around. It's how people have treated you. If you carry that, it deep in your heart, it impacts the quality of love that you share. And it's not indicative to the quality of love shared by God. And so I think I was asked to do that first, to not just say, I forgive you, but to ask for forgiveness first, so that I make sure I get rid of this baggage in my heart. And it did. It was like a weight that is lifted off. And then when I can reverse that and go around and forgive others who have hurt me terribly, hurt my heart, it was a little bit easier and more liberating. Of course, it impacts the other person as well. And part of this also is my belief in the power of words and language. I'm drawn back to the series of studies that were done in Japan by this researcher. The last name is Emoto, Masaru
Oh,
Emoto,
sure. Of course, he did all the
right?
water research.
He
Yes.
did the water, right? And negative, 2 canisters of water crystals, terrible words on one and beautiful words on the other. And when he took these time-lapse photos of them and saw the terrible words, the water crystals were like sludge, mud. And the most beautiful crystals in the other container. At the same time, there was another study in a Japanese elementary school. They had 3 jars of rice, and they did
Mm.
the same
Mhm.
thing, right? Good words,
Yeah.
bad words. And the third one, nothing, like you're dismissed. And they wanted to see which spoiled first. Of course, the one with nothing on it spoiled the fastest, like you're being dismissed. And the negative words were the next fastest that spoiled. The good words didn't spoil. And as one of my students who introduced me to it, actually, and he was doing marriage counseling for his graduating thesis, and he remarked, well, if our bodies are 70% water, when we speak to others like that, what is it doing to both of our bodies? Telling someone, you're ugly, you're a cheater, you're a con artist, you're stupid, things like that. And this is what I was drawn back to, why I was asked to make sure and seek forgiveness, because that then allows my own heart and mind to speak to others better rather than harming their hearts. I'm very conscious now of how I talk to others. This is why this current political environment is disturbing for me. And as I've become quite an activist and a writer now, in letting people know, we can disagree about political positions and policy. That doesn't mean we have to call the opponent horrible names. It has nothing to do with the policies, but instead hurts all of us physically. Physically. And I think that's why I was asked to take that first step.
That makes a lot of sense. Do
Yeah.
you know why I'm not bothered at all by the political climate right now?
Okay.
I don't follow any of it. I haven't watched a darn thing.
I don't either.
Seriously, it
I
doesn't
can't.
touch me.
Yeah.
I don't have commercials that I listen to on the radio because I have XM radio and I pretty much have Netflix, Prime, and YouTube, and that's about it.
Okay.
So I see signs. That's the only thing, that's the only way they can reach me.
Okay. But yes, I become on Facebook. It's interesting with several people that I know, when they talk about many different things. They were talking one time, conversation about the U.S. women's soccer team when Megan was the captain. And he said, well, I could, a whole group, about 50 people, we could no longer support the women's soccer team because we all know why. And he said, we can't support anything supported by the LGBTQI. And my response to them was, do you know the power of love? And I talked to them and said, what would happen if we changed our view toward people? Doesn't God love them? God loves all of us. So how can we say these things about others. And I drew out the experience of my own niece who didn't come, I didn't have the courage until much later to come out with her own family. I mean, the one person she told was my mother,
Really?
knowing that my mother would take it to the grave, which she
Mm,
did,
mm,
and
wow.
how she had been molested by her brother.
Mm,
So, you know, I made that comment and someone says, well, I can't support evil. And I said, since when is loving someone evil? And so depending on it, to me, I look I see these conversations and I have to say something now.
mhm, mhm. So
And it's, I would.
you were given instructions by about more than one thing, correct?
Yeah.
So forgiveness was one. Do you want to share another one?
Well, another one was to really make sure that I help people understand that the love of God is not a theoretical concept.
Okay, and what do you
Um,
mean by that?
as a teacher in a seminary, it's very easy. And as a former pastor, very easy. We talk about God's love. I grew up with the song, Jesus loves me. Yes, I know. Right. We talk about it. Oh, God loves you. But how much do we think about it as not just words, but it's real, it has substance. And in this experience, I was asked, how would I explain it if I had Mother God in front of me? What would I say? And that's what I said. I said, your love is no longer a theory now. It's not something I teach. It is something I have to live. How does it? So, in my piano students, for example, I let them know these are teenagers, most of them, young teens. And I say, I'm not interested in you becoming technically proficient. That comes in time. But I said, what I am concerned is that you play out of this. You allow your heart to flow through your hands and your fingers and let it be guided by your wisdom and understanding of the music so that your interpretation from your heart is heard through your piano playing. And it's a hard concept for them because they're 15, 16 years old. But I keep at it because I say here, and I try to give them examples, play examples for them. This is someone that I think is technically proficient, but there's a heart quality missing in it. And here is an example of someone whose music sings. So everything I do and I say and I talk about with people, that's the other change that I've been asked to really pay attention to, how to honor that experience, but also that it's possible for me to have that experience with Mother God all the time,
Now,
you
I've
know?
heard you say Mother God a few different times during this interview. Not very often that somebody refers to God
Mm.
in that way. So, will you explain why you have referred that way?
Because I view God as heavenly parent. And there's aspects and quality of Father God and Mother God. I'm part of a group also, a spiritual group that believes in gender balance in all things spiritual and theologically. And I think that much of the conversation I've had with God, my heavenly parent, has come from the mother aspect of God and the deep heart that comes from that dimension. So I've become a person who uses the term Mother God quite often now.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, after you've had this experience, at what point did you realize that voice that I heard when I was having my aneurysm was actually my mother? Because you said you didn't know who that voice was at the time it was happening.
Yeah. Well, as I began to, after I finished, when I was finally released from the ICU and sent to 2 weeks of rehab, in residential rehab, after that time when I was home and trying to recoup from everything, I then broke down all that happened to me. I didn't have time, of course. I wasn't conscious in the ICU. And even in the first week of the rehab place, I was still la la land half the time. So not until I got home did I begin to take apart what happened to me and why were these images of this dairy farm the only thing that I have to hold on to, and this conversation. I didn't tell anyone about this for a while. I needed to reflect on it. I had to meditate on it, pray on it. I did some reading and research, of course, of NDEs. I became acquainted with many of the books and resources that IANS has in their bibliographies. And in that reflection, I realized that's what I had. And therefore, what were the different pieces of it? And when I looked at the voice that was so clearly, feminine, I went and I was moved at that point. I wonder, I knew that mom died quickly. And I knew that it dealt with an aneurysm of some kind. So that led me to I had to really go through medical records, pay for this, pay for that, right? And access those, because no one in my family, not in the 80s, none of us really thought about how did someone die, you know. So I took the time to study. And then when I looked at what she died of, and I began asking, Mom, was that you? And she said, yes. And even in my heart surgery a few months ago, my open heart surgery, my mother has been with me to the point where I feel her presence here, whether it's putting like a blanket over me if I'm napping in the chair or going like this, it's okay. Not speaking, but there is a presence. Then it confirmed what I heard initially from her, that yes, that was her guiding me, because I sat in the chair. And there is a timeline on these aneurysms. It took 10 days for them to stop the bleeding as it was, and 3 procedures. But there is a time limit. And by the time I got to the other hospital in time for the surgeon, he didn't even wait for the anesthesia team. He went right in, but I was unconscious anyway. But it was at the 4.5-hour mark. 5 is usually the limit with a brain aneurysm, depending on his timing and with the amount of blood that was flowing in my head. So I realized that if I had sat there as I normally would, I would not be here. And I think that's why my mother responded. And I've always been very close to my mother. So
Wow,
she has
that's
guided me a lot.
incredible. I can't believe the synchronicity of you having an aneurysm in the same part of your brain on the same day at the same time of day that your mother did. That's
Yeah,
just so beyond coincidence, don't you think?
it is. It is. And the more I learned about her experience, the more I said, Mom and Mother God, thank you. Thank you. She did not want the same thing to happen to me.
Yeah. So a lot of times, Kathy, after people have had these experiences, they notice that they're different. There are abilities, there are things that are different. Have you had any of those experiences after your NDE?
I became much more sensitive. When I'm around someone, I can sense a lot more
Hmm.
what's going on. I can feel, how do I say, someone's, if there's some kind of spiritual reality around them, I can sense it, at least if it's good or bad. I may not be, I'm not a medium at all, but I am aware, and very much aware of that spiritual reality. And I follow that now and trust that. So if I get a sense, don't do this at this time, I don't. So mine were not physical, but they were spiritual.
It sounds like it awakened your intuition a little bit more.
I think so. That's a good way to put it, Laurie. It was definitely along those lines. Also, I can't. There are things um, I usually had. Being an intellectual person, I tended to have a quick tongue. I mean, I was never a cruel person by my language. I was. People thought, "Oh, she's nice," kind of thing. But I could respond back in a discussion, in a theological discussion, or any kind of discussion, as fast as the other person. And I could be quite sharp with my tone. I can't do that anymore.
Mm. It actually
I
sounds like a nice thing.
Yes, it is. That is a good thing. I don't. I find it harder to have those kind of arguments. You know.
Mm. Yeah, because you're coming from this place of love now.
Yeah,
Yeah, it makes a
definitely.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, Kathy, for the people that are watching, what would you share with them as maybe the most important thing that you've learned as a result of your near-death experience?
The one thing I've learned that dominates everything is love. That we were created out of love. We are created to love and to practice that love, to live that love. Um, you know, William Gladstone said, we look forward to the time when the power of love will replace love of power.
Oh, I love that.
And that's, it says, that's when our world will know the blessing of peace. And
Mm,
I believe that really summarizes a lot of that, what I have been left with and what continues to come to me now quite
right.
often.
And it sounds like that's what you're doing one person at a time.
Yeah, doesn't have to be the crowd of thousands. All it takes
Right.
is one person to change.
Well, right, because our ripple effect is just unknowable. You have no idea what a kindness or coming to somebody in a state of love will do to them that will ripple out from them and affect all kinds of other people. So even though it seems like it's one, it never is.
Yeah. Well, in this group I talked about that I'm part of, we do have a medium, quite incredible medium, I think, in my opinion. And we had a conversation with, let's say, a former governmental leader way back who was responsible for the deaths of large numbers of people.
Okay.
And that person, because I've been talking about love, I've been asked that by the medium. And I said, we are all loved by God. Mother and Father God love us. We just don't recognize it often or feel it or allow ourselves to feel it. And this person, and I won't say it because some people would be very upset if I said this person's name, but they said, well, even me? I said, don't you know Mother, Father, God loves you? And he said through the medium, do you know no one has ever told me that? And he started to cry. So to me, that love is everything. And I'm not, and that's, I believe in Martin Luther King's beloved community concept. And that's what I'm looking for in the world around me. I'm looking for people in all walks of life, business, political, you name it, who understand the concept of beloved community and are willing to build it. Because at the heart of that beloved community, it takes love to create it.
Well, I think that is an amazing message for everybody to hear. So, Kathy, if people want to reach out to you, want to connect with you, how would they do that? Are you willing to let people do that?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I'm an emailer.
Okay.
big time. So it's my email's Dr. Kathy Winings, DrKathywings at Gmail.
Okay, and I'll put that down in the show notes also.
Sure.
Kathy, it was so nice to be able to hug you at the IANS conference. I'm looking forward to getting to spend some time with you again next year when that will be in Chicago in 2025. Thank you so much for sharing this story with everybody and for sharing all of these amazing concepts that God shared with you that you're able to send into the world because you are absolutely affecting the collective consciousness. And I know that is so greatly needed right now.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come on today, Lori. I really appreciate it. And I've been very grateful to have met you at IANS, and I look forward to other conversations in Chicago.
Sounds great. Well, I will see you there. And thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.